This is not a top 10. This is not a top 85. This is 7 stunning ambers. The temperatures are starting to drop. Winter is fast approaching. So that means I want to reach out to some of that hygge, Hygge, that Scandinavian stuff where, you drink tea and cocoa and you sit by a fire and you get all snuggly under blankets and you just appreciate those, hunkering down and snuggling in kind of activities. It also means that I'd like to enjoy some ambers. So I have 7 ambers that I'd like to share with you that are my favorites. And I'll also mention a few honorable mentions later. Those ones I don't have full bottles of because I can't have full bottles of everything, you know? But I have full bottles of these 7, and I'd like to share them with you. And without further ado, I'd like to start off with the first one that stole my heart, which is Serge Lutens Amber Sultan. This was released in 2000, and this is really a reference amber. To give you some background on where things began with me and Amber Sultan, as I walked into Barney's and I saw this counter with bottles that looked very much like this. However, at the time in 2007, they had the Palais Royal and a slightly different font, but they looked very similar to this, and they were all standing sentinel at that counter. And they just struck me visually. So the first thing was the visual appeal of the house, the brand. And I asked the sales assistant, well, what is the story behind Serge Lutens? It looks exotic and mysterious. Tell me about it. And we chatted, and she was kind enough to give me a handful of samples, which included Chergui, Cedle, Arabi, and Amber Sultan. And that was the first time that I really experienced a fragrance that focused on that amber accord, the amber accord of vanilla, benzoin, and labdanum. I recognized it because it's been used in perfumery for ages, in orientals, what we are moving towards calling ambers, which will still be kind of confusing to me because when I think of an amber, I think of something like this and the others that I'll be discussing. But that's a whole other story. But Amber Sultan is not an exceedingly sweet amber, and I'm thankful for that because I can only handle so much sweetness. I need something to balance it out. And what's great about this one is that you have this herbal quality for the first stage to second stage maybe of its development, where you have bay leaf and oregano, myrtle, which lends this camphoraceous quality to it, almost medicinal, a little bit of green angelica, and it dries down, resinous, a bit vanillic, but not exceedingly so. It's balanced more towards it's more benzoin and labdanum leaning, which that's how I prefer my amber accords anyhow. And it's dry and powdery and woody and just gorgeous stuff. And it is a very popular fragrance. It has had many reviews and many tributes, and it's been dear to me for going on 15 years almost. Amber Sultan, that's my first one. The next is Amber Fatish from Anikotal. So I don't know this firsthand, but I've been told that the newest bottles for the house, rebranded simply Goutal, that the composition has been watered down a bit. I don't know that for a fact, but I've heard it a number of times, along with a few others from Goutal. So the only ones that I can recommend would be these rectangular bottles. So it could be this label or it could be the earlier label. So Amber Fatish, this was released in 2007. So it was work of Isabelle Doyen, who's the house perfumer for Goutal. It's an incensey amber. It's smoky. It's much smokier than Amber Sultan. There's a styrax in it. So styrax is this resin that has almost this plasticine kind of phenolic, smoky quality to it. It's if you think of styrene, styrax and styrene, the association. It's a really peculiar smell, but it's somehow seductive in its own way. And this is really what stands out about Amber Fatish. There's heavier labdanum here than even in Amber Sultan. It's very incensey. It smells like an incense censer is waving in the air, but the incense itself is based on amber, but it has that molybdenum as well. And it's really a beautiful one. Like I said, I can't really speak for how it is today, but if you can pick up one of these, the Amber Fatish bottles that are rectangular, then I think that you'll be in good shape. Yeah, it's great stuff. And this demonstrates a very good use of woody ambers as they were intended to be used, because it's dosed very carefully to exalt some of those qualities of amber. So I think ambrosinite might be in this. I don't know that for certain, but from my experience with that particular aromachem, I can kind of pick it up here. But it works out really well to create this incensey, ambery accord that just lifts up into the stratosphere like the smoke. Really good one. Then we have Amber Aurea from Profumum Roma, sorry. This, as you can see, it's suggested in the juice itself. This is really completely saturated with resins. There is a lot of labdanum in this, and also not only labdanum, but also cistus. So both materials come from the same plant, cistus labdanum. However, labdanum comes from the exudate gum of the plant itself. So that can be extracted as a resinoid or an absolute. Now the cistus, however, comes from the stems and the leaves and has a somewhat different profile to it. It's much more top note heavy, a bit more vegetal, high pitched. Kind of reminds me a little bit of sort of the way like a dense syrupy kind of aperitif might be. But it is a bit different in scent profile, even though it comes from the same plant. So I pick up a lot of that in this, along with that labdanum. It's just very smoky. There's a lot of myrrh in this one. It's sweet, but also salty. Sweet and salty, sweet and salty. It's just a really powerful and bold amber. Glorious stuff. And even maybe a little bit of an ambergris in it, an ambergris tincture that I can detect in the dry down as well. Fantastic stuff, though. Amber Aurea from Profumum Roma. Next, from 1988, so we're going pretty far back. This is from the house of Maître Parfumier Gantier. It is Amber Pressier. The name is on the side of the bottle because all the bottles are uniform. At least I think they still are, but this version of bottle was uniform, and then they would just have the name sort of adhered onto the side or the bottom. It's on the bottom too. See. So Amber Pressier was composed by Francois Laporte. He was the founder of L'Artisan Parfumeur, and then he broke off to start Métier Parfumeur Gantier in 1988. So this was in that premier lineup of, here we go, in that premier lineup of fragrances from the house. And I would call this old world opulence. You have a much more beautifully powdery, soft, really resinous and aromatic. So you get a lot of balsamic stuff going here. You have that cinnamic Tolu balsam, which is such a. I love the way Tolu balsam lends effects into a fragrance. It isn't like full-on cinnamon, but it has this cinnamic quality, which is really intriguing. There's also Peru balsam in this as well. There's a ton of myrrh, and it's almost like that cola myrrh a little bit. And it's aromatic to open up with. There's some citrus with lavender, some spices, some nutmeg, maybe a little bit of clove. It's beautiful stuff. So it is a great diversion for an amber, and it is critically lauded. It is recognized as another wonderful reference amber, and you should check it out. I think it is a little bit difficult to get these red bottles. But I have heard that the more recent version of this is not bad at all. So maybe if you ask for a sample from Lucky Scent, you can try out the current version and see if it tickles your fancy. So that's Amber Pressier. And then next, Etro Alma. Etro is one of my favorite houses. Italian perfumery at its finest. I think they're known for their paisley and their pastels and their colorful styles, and that's reflected in their fragrances. I have a number that I really enjoy, and this is one of them. Ambra was released in 1989. That was when they had their first line of fragrances that year. This one is much brighter and citrusy. You have lemon and bergamot at the top, and there's a fir resin, so it's a bit pine needly and sweetly coniferous. There's a lot of Apopanax in this one too. I find Apopanax comes up a few times in a few different Etro fragrances. And Apopanax is also called sweet myrrh. It is a resin that has certain aspects to it that are a little bit bitter like myrrh, but there's this almost this toffee note to Apopanax that I find really enjoyable. It's kind of almost caramelic and toffee-like, but not overly sweet. But it's just beautiful stuff. And I do detect it here. It kind of reminds me of like an herbal liqueur. And I think that's with, the citruses and the conifers and some of the herbs that are in this. It almost smells like this delicious potable, like you almost want to drink it. Yeah, this is a nice one, and I like this version. Some people say that the older version in the different label and the gold cap is superior, but I like this, so I'm going by this. I recommend this version of Ambra. Next is Ambre Kanjar from Unuit Man, I think. I think that's the name of the house. At least it's on here. Unuit Nomad, I think. It's the only one that I have from the house. This is Amber via Plum. So this kind of reminds me of some of those like opulent oriental slash amber scents from like the late 70s and early 80s with like a heavy plum note. And plum not isn't like a fresh, plum that you get in the grocery store and you bite into. Like this is like prune plum, like those Italian plums, the dark purple Italian plum, almost stewed, and giving off an aroma from sort of like a compote. Uh, and the amber is really beautiful as well. It's vanillic. It has a lot of resins. Um, this is one of my favorite fragrances to actually feature plum. So if that is of interest to you, perhaps um, you should try this one. If you're a plummy type of person, it's a good one. And then lastly, this one is from Estee Lauder. Uh, Amber Mystique. I almost said Amber Mystique, but this one is Amber. Amber Mystique. This one was released not too far back, but I think it's already been discontinued. And boy, is this one a stunner. Um, when I picked this up, it was going for pretty cheap, but I don't know if that's really still the case. But this one is a rosy amber. I wouldn't say it's an ambery rose. It's more a rosy amber, and it's just very sensual and rich, and it's just this really interesting, dark, fruity character. Look at that reflection. Hi. There is this raspberry that's in it. It's not like fresh raspberries though. It smells like raspberry preserve. And the way that interacts with the rose, it sort of brings out some qualities in the rose and in the amber itself. Um, it kind of reminds me a little bit of not so much in the exactly the way it smells, but in its feel. It reminds me a lot of like Féminité du Bois from Shiseido slash Serge Lutens. Um, and there's just like a pinch of oud, just a smidgen, just a little itty bitty bit. Um, so if that matters to you, I thought I'd let you know that. I know that I'm a bit persnickety about my ouds in fragrances, but here it is very polite. It plays well. It doesn't muscle its way in. Thankfully, there's no saffron. Thank goodness for that. But it's just gorgeous stuff. This is one that was really slept on when it was available for song, and I'd pick this up if I were you before it gets a little bit more difficult to obtain. Yeah, it's great stuff. It almost some of it almost reminds me a little bit like red wine as well. Um, Maybe like a raspberry wine if there is such a thing. And there's like a great woodiness to it too. A lot of cedar in the dry down as well. Excellent stuff. So those are the 7 stunning ambers that I wanted to share. If you enjoyed this video, please like, please subscribe, and if you click on the bell, you'll be notified of further videos. And also check out our Tuesday live streams called Effluvium, where I have guests each week, a regular panel, and we have lots of great stuff to share. That's 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesdays here on my YouTube channel. So until next time, be well.